On the night of March 27, 1993, $6.9 million disappeared from the counting room of the Marquis Entertainment Complex in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. The money vanished without a trace, without violence, and without a single alarm being triggered. For 26 years, the case remained one of the most baffling unsolved thefts in Georgia's history. The FBI interviewed hundreds of people, analyzed thousands of hours of security footage, and followed leads that stretched from Atlanta to Miami to Las Vegas. But the money, and the person who took it, seemed to have evaporated into thin air. What investigators didn't know was that the man responsible for the heist had never left Atlanta at all. He continued working in the service industry, living modestly in a small apartment in East Atlanta, and never once aroused suspicion. His name was Terrence Bryant, and for more than 2 decades, he lived what appeared to be an unremarkable life as a restaurant manager and part-time security consultant. The money sat hidden in a place so obvious, so mundane, that law enforcement had walked past it dozens of times without ever knowing. The truth only emerged in 2019, when a bartender named Simone Whitaker was closing out the register at a sports bar in Decatur. She noticed something unusual about a regular customer's behavior, something that triggered a memory from years earlier. What she discovered would unravel one of the most sophisticated and patient criminal operations the Southeast had ever seen, and reveal that sometimes the greatest hiding place is simply the passage of time itself. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Marquis Entertainment Complex stood at the corner of Peachtree Street and Andrew Young International Boulevard, a 3-story monument to Atlanta's nightlife renaissance in the early 1990s. The building housed a nightclub on the main floor, a high-end restaurant on the 2nd level, and a VIP lounge on the 3rd. But what made the marquee truly unique was what lay beneath it. In the basement level, accessible only through a reinforced steel door and a complex security system, was one of the largest private cash counting facilities in the Southeast. The Marquis wasn't just an entertainment venue, it was a hub for the entire nightlife corridor of downtown Atlanta. Club owners from across the city would bring their weekend receipts to the Marquis counting room every Monday morning. The facility processed cash from over 30 different establishments, consolidating the money before armored car services transported it to various banks throughout the week. On any given Monday, the counting room held between $4 and $8 million in cash. The operation was perfectly legal, licensed, and insured. It was also, as Terrence Bryant discovered, vulnerable in ways that no one had anticipated. Terrence Bryant was 32 years old in 1993. He had grown up in the Mechanicsville neighborhood of Atlanta, the youngest of 3 brothers. His mother worked as a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital, and his father had been a construction foreman until a workplace accident left him partially disabled when Terrence was 16. Terrence had been a good student, earning a partial scholarship to Georgia State University, where he studied business administration. But family financial pressures forced him to drop out after 2 years. He worked a series of jobs in the hospitality industry, eventually landing a position as assistant manager at the Marquis restaurant in 1989. Terrence was known for his reliability and attention to detail. He arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for additional responsibilities. Management trusted him with keys, alarm codes, and access to areas that most employees never saw. He was quiet, methodical, and seemingly content with his modest salary and predictable life. What no one knew was that Terrence was drowning in debt. His father's medical bills had exhausted the family's savings. His older brother, Darnell, had been arrested on drug charges and needed money for legal fees. Terrence himself was nearly $30,000 in debt from student loans and credit cards. He felt trapped, suffocated by financial obligations that seemed to grow faster than he could possibly address them. It was during a late shift in October 1989 that Terrence first saw the counting room. He had been asked to deliver food to the security staff working the overnight shift. The steel door was propped open for ventilation, and through it, Terrence glimpsed rows of money-counting machines, stacks of currency, and just 2 guards monitoring the entire operation. The image stayed with him. He didn't immediately think of stealing anything, but the seed was planted, a small voice in the back of his mind noting the possibility. Over the following months, Terence began paying attention to the counting room's rhythms and routines. He learned that the facility processed the most cash on Monday nights, after the weekend receipts had been delivered. He noticed that the security staff rotated on a predictable schedule, and that certain guards were more attentive than others. He observed that the restaurant's kitchen had a small service elevator that descended to the basement level, used primarily for delivering supplies and removing trash. Most importantly, he discovered that the counting room's security system, installed in 1987, had a significant design flaw. The alarm system was sophisticated for its time, with motion sensors, door contacts, and a direct line to a private security company. But Terence noticed that when the kitchen staff used the service elevator late at night, the motion sensors in the basement hallway would trigger briefly before the security guards manually reset them. The system had been configured to allow for this regular traffic, which meant there was a window of time, usually between 30 and 45 seconds, when additional motion in that hallway wouldn't immediately trigger a full alarm response. The guards would simply glance at the monitor, see the elevator descending, and reset the sensor without investigating further. Terence spent the next 3 years learning everything he could about the Marquis's security infrastructure. He befriended the building's maintenance supervisor, a man named Curtis, who often complained about the outdated electrical system and the complexity of the building's layout. From Curtis, Terence learned about the building's original blueprints, the location of circuit breakers, and the fact that the counting room's backup generator only powered the lights and computers, not the alarm system's motion sensors. He learned that on nights when severe weather knocked out power in downtown Atlanta, the motion sensors would default to a passive mode to prevent false alarms when the electricity restored. He studied the armored car schedules and realized that pickup times varied, but that the largest accumulation of cash always occurred on Monday nights after 10 p.m., when the final clubs made their deposits but before the Tuesday morning pickup. He observed the guards and identified their routines, their break times, and their habits. He noticed that Jerome Williams, one of the senior guards, always stepped out for a cigarette at 11:15 p.m., leaving just one person monitoring the security feeds for approximately 8 minutes. But Terence's planning went far deeper than simply identifying the right moment to act. He understood that stealing money was only half the challenge. The real difficulty would be avoiding detection afterward, managing the stolen cash, and living with the crime for however long it took for suspicion to fade. He began educating himself about money laundering, reading books on financial crime, studying cases of successful and failed heists. He learned that most criminals were caught not during the crime itself, but through their spending patterns afterward. In 1991, Terence began preparing his exit strategy, even though he hadn't yet committed to executing the theft. He started documenting every aspect of his life, creating a paper trail of a modest, financially struggling restaurant manager. He kept credit card statements showing minimum payments and mounting interest. He maintained his small apartment, drove an aging Honda Civic, and lived visibly within his limited means. He also began slowly purchasing items he would need for the heist, always paying cash, always buying from different stores, spreading purchases across months to avoid any pattern. He bought a small hydraulic jack from a hardware store in Marietta. 2 months later, he purchased a professional locksmith's tension wrench from a pawn shop in College Park. He acquired a dark blue maintenance jumpsuit from a uniform supply company in Decatur. He bought a large duffel bag, gloves, and a small LED flashlight. Each item was generic, untraceable, and seemingly innocuous on its own. Together, they formed the toolkit for one of the most carefully planned thefts in Georgia history. By early 1993, Terence had been observing and planning for over 3 years. He had refined his understanding of the security system to the point where he could visualize every step of the operation in precise detail. He had identified his window of opportunity, gathered his tools, and prepared his cover story, but he still hadn't fully committed to the crime. The decision came in February 1993, when his father suffered a stroke that left him requiring round-the-clock care. The medical bills were catastrophic. Insurance covered only a fraction of the costs. Terence watched his mother age years in a matter of weeks from stress and exhaustion. His brother Darnell, recently released from prison, was unable to find work and contribute to the family's expenses. Terence realized he had reached a breaking point. He could continue working, accumulating debt, and watching his family suffer, or he could act on the plan he had been developing for 3 years. The decision, once made, brought him a strange sense of calm. He selected a date, March 27, 1993, a Saturday night when the Marquis would be hosting a major concert event. The club would be packed, chaotic, and the counting room would be processing one of the largest cash volumes of the year. On the morning of March 27, 1993, Terence Bryant woke at 6 a.m. in his apartment on Flat Shoals Avenue. He ate a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, reading the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as he always did. He went for a jog through East Atlanta Village, maintaining his normal weekend routine. He spent the afternoon visiting his father at the rehabilitation facility in Decatur, sitting beside the bed and making small talk about nothing in particular. He told his mother he loved her when he left. She wouldn't understand the significance of those words until much later. Terence arrived at the Marquis at 8 p.m. for his regular Saturday evening shift at the restaurant. He worked the floor as he always did, greeting customers, managing servers, ensuring everything ran smoothly. He was polite, professional, and utterly ordinary. At 10:30 p.m., as the restaurant began winding down and the nightclub below reached peak capacity, Terence told his supervisor that he was feeling ill and needed to go home. She noticed he did look pale, tired. She told him to get some rest. He thanked her and left through the front entrance. But Terence didn't go home. He walked 3 blocks to where he had parked his Honda Civic that morning, in a public lot he never normally used. In the trunk was a gym bag containing his maintenance jumpsuit, gloves, tools, and a large empty duffel bag. He changed in the front seat, putting the jumpsuit over his regular clothes. He waited until 11:10 p.m., then walked back toward the Marquis, approaching from the rear alley where delivery trucks made their morning drop-offs. The alley was dark, illuminated only by a single streetlight half a block away. Terence had noticed months earlier that this light had been malfunctioning, flickering on and off unpredictably. 2 weeks before the heist, he had loosened the bulb just enough to ensure it would remain dark. He moved quickly through the alley to the kitchen's rear entrance, a heavy metal door used exclusively for deliveries. Terence had made an impression of this key 2 years earlier, using a bar of soap and later creating a duplicate at a hardware store in Buckhead. The key turned smoothly. He was inside. The kitchen was dark and empty. The restaurant had closed 30 minutes earlier, and the cleaning crew had already finished their work and departed. Terence moved through the familiar space, his LED flashlight providing just enough illumination to navigate. He reached the service elevator and pressed the button for the basement level. This was the first critical moment. The elevator's descent would trigger the motion sensor in the basement hallway. The guard monitoring the security feeds would see the alert, assume it was routine mechanical movement or a temperature fluctuation, and reset the sensor. Terence was counting on 45 seconds of grace period. The elevator doors opened onto the basement hallway. Terence stepped out and immediately moved to his left, pressing himself against the wall where he knew the motion sensor's blind spot existed. He had identified this gap in coverage months earlier by studying the sensor's specifications and field of view. He waited, counting seconds in his head. Above him, on the ground floor, Jerome Williams would be finishing his cigarette, preparing to return to the security office. The window was closing. Terence moved quickly down the hallway toward the counting room. The steel door was locked as expected, but he wasn't planning to go through the door. Instead, he moved past it to a maintenance closet 10 feet further down the hallway. This closet, used for storing cleaning supplies and housing electrical panels, shared a wall with the counting room. More importantly, the wall was not reinforced steel like the counting room door. It was standard drywall over metal studs, original to the building's 1982 construction. Terence had discovered this vulnerability 18 months earlier while helping Curtis repair a water leak in the basement. He had noticed the hollow sound the wall made, had casually asked about the building's construction, had learned that only the door and the exterior walls of the counting room were reinforced. The interior walls, considered a secondary security measure, were standard commercial construction. Inside the maintenance closet, Terence worked quickly. He removed several shelves, stacking them quietly in the corner. Behind the shelves, at floor level, he used the tension wrench to pry away the baseboard trim. Then, using a small handheld drywall saw he had purchased months earlier, he began cutting into the wall. The saw was designed to be quiet, and the noise from the nightclub 2 floors above provided additional sound cover. He cut a rectangular opening, approximately 2 feet wide and 18 inches tall, just large enough for a person to crawl through. The drywall came away in sections. Behind it was the metal stud framing, but the studs were spaced 16 inches apart, standard construction code. Terence had measured this gap precisely during his previous reconnaissance. He squeezed through the opening, pulling the duffel bag behind him. He was now inside the counting room, having bypassed every security measure without triggering a single alarm. The counting room was larger than it appeared from the doorway. Rows of money-counting machines lined the walls. In the center of the room were several large tables where currency was sorted and bundled. Metal carts held canvas bags filled with cash waiting to be processed. Security cameras covered the room from 3 angles, but Terence had positioned himself in a narrow gap between 2 equipment racks where the camera coverage overlapped imperfectly. He had exactly 12 minutes before the guard made his scheduled walkthrough of the basement level. Terence didn't take money from the counting tables or the obvious storage areas. That cash was already logged, counted, and documented. Instead, he focused on a specific set of canvas bags in the far corner of the room, bags that had been delivered that evening from clubs that closed particularly late. These bags represented receipts from Saturday night that wouldn't be processed until Monday morning. The money hadn't been officially counted yet, which meant there was a grace period before anyone would know exactly how much was missing. He opened each bag carefully, using a small scale he had brought to estimate weight and calculate approximate value. He selected bags that contained primarily large bills, 50s and 100s, avoiding bags heavy with 1s and 5s. He transferred the money into his duffel bag, working with practiced efficiency. When the duffel was full, he estimated he had taken approximately $4 million. He considered taking more, but discipline overrode greed. The bag was already heavy, difficult to maneuver. Taking more would slow his escape and increase his risk. Terence checked his watch. 8 minutes had elapsed. He retreated through the opening in the wall, pulling the duffel bag after him. In the maintenance closet, he quickly repositioned the drywall sections, pressing them back into place. They wouldn't hold up to close inspection, but in the dim lighting of the basement, they would appear intact for at least several hours. He replaced the baseboard trim and restacked the shelves. The entire process took 90 seconds. He made his way back to the service elevator, timing his movement to coincide with a particularly loud bass drop from the music upstairs. The elevator returned him to the kitchen level. He exited through the rear door, walking quickly but not running through the alley. At the street, he forced himself to slow down to appear casual. Just a maintenance worker finishing a late shift. The duffel bag was heavy, but he carried it naturally, as if it contained nothing more than tools and dirty uniforms. Terence reached his car at 11:47 p.m. He placed the duffel bag in the trunk, removed the jumpsuit, and drove away from downtown Atlanta at exactly the speed limit. He took surface streets rather than the highway, avoiding potential traffic stops. He drove to a storage facility in Forest Park, a neighborhood south of the city, where he had rented a climate-controlled unit 3 months earlier under a false name, paying cash for 6 months in advance. Inside the storage unit, Terence had prepared carefully. He had purchased a large commercial safe, the kind used in small businesses, and had it delivered to the unit weeks earlier. He transferred the money from the duffel bag to the safe, working methodically despite his exhaustion and the adrenaline coursing through his system. When the safe was loaded, he locked it and covered it with moving blankets and boxes of old books he had bought from a used bookstore. The storage unit looked cluttered but unremarkable, like thousands of others across the Atlanta metro area. Terence returned to his apartment at 1:30 a.m. He burned the jumpsuit, gloves, and tools in a metal trash can in the alley behind his building, waiting until the materials were completely consumed before disposing of the ashes in a dumpster 3 blocks away. He showered, changed into fresh clothes, and forced himself to eat a sandwich despite having no appetite. Then he got into bed and stared at the ceiling until dawn, his mind racing through every detail of the operation, searching for mistakes or oversights. Sunday morning arrived with rain and grey skies. Terence called his supervisor at the Marquis to check in, explaining that he was still feeling unwell but hoped to return to work Monday. She told him not to worry, to take care of himself. He spent Sunday in his apartment, watching television, reading the newspaper, doing laundry. He visited his father again in the afternoon, maintaining his routine. Nothing in his behavior suggested anything unusual had occurred. The theft wasn't discovered until Monday morning at approximately 8:40 a.m. The overnight security shift had completed their rounds without noticing anything unusual. The counting room door remained locked and secure. But when the Monday morning staff arrived and began processing the weekend receipts, they realized that several canvas bags were missing. An initial inventory suggested the loss might be substantial, but the exact amount couldn't be determined immediately because the missing bags contained unprocessed currency from late Saturday night deposits. By noon on Monday, the Marquis had contacted the FBI and the Atlanta Police Department. Special Agent Robert Delaney was assigned to lead the investigation. Delaney was a 20-year veteran of the FBI's Atlanta field office, with extensive experience in bank fraud and organized crime. He arrived at the Marquis that afternoon with a team of forensic specialists and began the painstaking process of reconstructing what had happened. The investigation quickly focused on the maintenance closet and the hole in the wall. Delaney realized immediately that this was not an opportunistic crime. The thief had intimate knowledge of the building's layout and security systems. The breach had been meticulously planned and expertly executed. The FBI began interviewing every employee who had access to the basement level, every contractor who had worked on the building, every security guard who knew the counting room's procedures. Terrence Bryant was interviewed on Tuesday afternoon. He sat in a small office on the second floor of the Marquis and answered questions for 90 minutes. Yes, he had worked Saturday night. Yes, he had left early due to illness. No, he didn't know anything about the counting room or its operations. Yes, he understood the restaurant staff weren't given access to the basement. Agent Delaney asked about his financial situation. Terrence was honest. He explained his father's medical bills, his student loans, his credit card debt. He provided documentation. Delaney noted that Terrence appeared cooperative and forthcoming, if somewhat nervous. But many people were nervous when being questioned by the FBI. The investigation expanded rapidly. The FBI interviewed over 300 people in the first month alone. They analyzed security footage from surrounding buildings, hoping to spot someone entering or leaving the Marquis during the relevant time window. They found nothing conclusive. They examined financial records of every employee and contractor, looking for suspicious deposits or purchases. They conducted surveillance on individuals they considered persons of interest. They offered a reward of $100,000 for information leading to an arrest and recovery of the stolen money. Weeks became months. The FBI's working theory was that the theft had been perpetrated by someone with inside knowledge, possibly working in concert with organized crime groups who could help launder the stolen currency. They investigated connections between Marquis employees and known criminal organizations in Atlanta, Miami, and New York. They found no credible links. The case began to go cold, though it was never officially closed. Agent Delaney continued to investigate intermittently, convinced that eventually someone would make a mistake, or that new evidence would emerge. Terrence Bryant continued working at the Marquis until June 1993, when he resigned to take a position as a manager at a corporate restaurant chain in Buckhead. His departure was unremarkable. Several other employees had left in the months following the theft, unsettled by the constant FBI presence and the cloud of suspicion that hung over the establishment. Terrence's new job paid slightly better, and he told colleagues he needed the additional income to help with his family's medical expenses. What no one knew was that Terrence had not touched a single dollar of the stolen money. The cash remained locked in the storage unit in Forest Park, undisturbed. Terrence had made a critical decision in the immediate aftermath of the heist. He would not spend any of the money for at least 5 years, preferably longer. He understood that the FBI would be watching for unusual financial activity and that patience was his greatest ally. So he continued living his modest life, working his restaurant job, struggling with the same bills and debts that had motivated the crime in the first place. The psychological toll of this decision was enormous. Terrence had committed the perfect crime, had stolen nearly $7 million, and yet he could not improve his life in any meaningful way. He watched his father's condition deteriorate slowly over the following years. He continued making minimum payments on his credit cards. He drove the same aging Honda Civic. The money might as well not have existed, except as a constant weight on his conscience and a source of perpetual anxiety. In 1998, 5 years after the heist, Terrence finally began accessing the storage unit. He did so carefully, visiting no more than once every few months, always at different times, always watching for any sign of surveillance. He would remove $5,000 or $10,000 at a time, small amounts that he could slowly integrate into his life without raising suspicion. He used the cash for everyday expenses, groceries, gas, utilities, allowing his legitimate income to accumulate in his bank accounts. Over time, his visible financial situation improved gradually, naturally, in a way that corresponded with his career advancement and salary increases. Terrence changed jobs several times over the years, moving from restaurant management to security consulting. His experience in the hospitality industry and his self-taught knowledge of security systems made him valuable to clients who wanted to protect their businesses from theft. The irony was not lost on him. He advised club owners and restaurant operators on how to secure their cash handling operations, how to identify vulnerabilities in their security protocols. He was good at his work, and his reputation grew. By 2005, Terence had slowly laundered approximately $1.3 million through careful, patient spending over 7 years. He had helped his mother with his father's medical expenses, though he had to be careful to attribute this help to bonuses and successful investments rather than inexplicable cash. His father passed away in 2003, never knowing that his son had become a thief to help pay for his care. Terence felt the weight of that secret like a stone in his chest. The remaining money, still more than $5 million, remained in the storage unit. Terence began to wonder if he would ever be able to use it all. The cash was deteriorating slightly despite the climate control, the bills becoming worn and faded. He considered various schemes for laundering larger amounts, but every option seemed to carry unacceptable risk. So he continued his patient approach, taking small amounts, spending carefully, and living a life that appeared entirely ordinary. In 2010, Terence moved from his apartment in East Atlanta to a small house in Decatur. He purchased the property with a conventional mortgage, using his documented income and solid credit score. The house was modest, appropriate for a single man in his late 40s working in security consulting. He had a girlfriend briefly, a woman named Angela, who worked as a paralegal. She met his friends, his family, and never suspected that the man she was dating had committed one of Atlanta's most notorious unsolved crimes. The relationship ended after a year, not because of any suspicion or discovery, but simply because they wanted different things from life. The years continued to pass. The Marquee Entertainment Complex had closed in 2001, a victim of changing entertainment trends and the venue's tainted reputation after the theft. The building was eventually demolished and replaced with a mixed-use development. Agent Delaney retired from the FBI in 2008, leaving the Bryant case file to a younger generation of investigators who periodically reviewed it but found no new leads to pursue. The insurance company had paid out the claim in 1995, writing off the loss as an unsolved theft. The case was mentioned occasionally in true crime forums and podcasts, usually as an example of a perfect heist that had never been solved. By 2015, Terence had lived with his secret for 22 years. He was 54 years old, graying at the temples, carrying the weight of middle age and the accumulated stress of decades of deception. He had laundered approximately $2.4 million, leaving roughly $4.5 million still hidden in the storage unit. He had invested some of his legitimate earnings wisely, had a modest retirement account, and owned his home. He could have walked away from the remaining stolen money and lived comfortably on what he had already secured. But the money remained, a constant presence in his life, impossible to ignore or abandon. Terence's careful routine continued unchanged until March of 2019. That was when he made a small, seemingly insignificant decision that would ultimately unravel everything he had built. He began frequenting a sports bar in Decatur, called the Penalty Box, a casual place near his home where he would stop for a beer and dinner once or twice a week. The bar was unremarkable, the kind of neighborhood establishment where regulars knew each other's names, but not their life stories. Terence appreciated the anonymity. He would sit at the bar, watch whatever game was on television, and enjoy the simple pleasure of being around people without the burden of deeper connection. The bartender, who usually worked Tuesday and Thursday evenings, was a woman named Simone Whitaker. She was 38 years old, sharp-eyed, and possessed of the particular skill that good bartenders develop for reading people and remembering details. Simone had been working in the service industry for 15 years, had seen countless customers come and go, and had developed an instinct for noticing patterns and inconsistencies in human behavior. Terence became a regular at the Penalty Box throughout the spring of 2019. He always paid cash, always tipped exactly 20%, and always sat in the same seat at the end of the bar. He was polite, but not overly friendly, the kind of customer who was easy to serve and didn't cause problems. Simone learned that he worked in security consulting, that he lived nearby, that he followed the Hawks and the Falcons. The conversations were superficial, pleasant, and forgettable. But Simone noticed something odd. Terence's wallet was old, worn, and appeared to contain only cash. He never used a credit card, never checked his phone to pay with a digital wallet. In an era when most customers paid electronically, this was unusual but not unprecedented. Some people preferred cash for privacy or budgeting reasons. What caught Simone's attention was the quality and condition of the bills. They were old currency, the style that had been updated in the mid-1990s with new anti-counterfeiting features. The bills Terence used were from before those updates, bills that had been out of circulation for decades. Simone didn't think much of it initially. Older bills still occasionally appeared in circulation, usually from people who had kept cash in drawers or safes for years. But she noticed that Terence consistently used these older bills week after week. She began paying attention to the serial numbers, a habit she had developed years earlier when the bar had problems with counterfeit currency. The bills weren't counterfeit, but they were consistently from the early 1990s, all of them worn in a similar way, as if they had been stored together for a long time. In late May 2019, Simone was watching a true crime documentary while folding laundry in her apartment. The episode covered unsolved heists in the Southeast, and one segment focused on the 1993 Marquis Entertainment Complex theft. Simone had been working at a different bar in Atlanta in 1993, and she vaguely remembered the news coverage when it happened. The documentary mentioned that the stolen money had never been recovered, that it consisted primarily of cash from Saturday night club receipts, and that it had been taken by someone with intimate knowledge of the building's security systems. Something clicked in Simone's mind. She thought about Terence, about his old bills, about his claim to work in security consulting, about his age, which would have put him in his early 30s in 1993. She told herself it was ridiculous, that she was making connections that didn't exist, but the thought persisted. She began paying closer attention when Terence came into the bar. On June 6, 2019, Terence paid for his dinner and drinks with a $50 bill. Simone examined it casually as she made change. The bill was from 1990, Series 1990, worn but intact. When Terence left, Simone took a photo of the bill with her phone before depositing it in the register. She went home that night and researched the Marquis case more thoroughly, reading old newspaper articles and FBI press releases. She learned that the theft had occurred on March 27, 1993, that approximately $6.9 million had been stolen, and that the FBI had interviewed hundreds of people but never made an arrest. Simone struggled with what to do with her suspicions. She had no proof, only a gut feeling based on old currency and vague coincidences. She didn't want to falsely accuse someone or waste law enforcement's time on a wild theory. But she also couldn't ignore the possibility that she had stumbled onto something significant. She decided to document her observations carefully before contacting anyone. Over the next 2 weeks, Simone photographed every bill Terence used at the bar. She noted the dates, the denominations, and the serial numbers. She compiled a file documenting that between March 19th and June 13th, Terence had paid exclusively with currency printed before 1993, with no exceptions. She researched Terence online and discovered his LinkedIn profile, which showed he had worked at the Marquis Entertainment Complex from 1989 to 1993, exactly the relevant time period. On June 18, 2019, Simone contacted the FBI's Atlanta field office. She spoke with a junior agent who listened to her story with polite skepticism. Cold cases from 26 years ago were rarely solved based on the observations of a bartender about old currency. But the agent agreed to file a report and forward it to the appropriate unit. Simone didn't hear anything for 3 weeks. What she didn't know was that her report had landed on the desk of Special Agent Michelle Torres, who had recently been assigned to review cold cases for possible reinvestigation. Torres read Simone's report with interest. The documentation was surprisingly thorough, and the observations about the currency were intriguing. Torres pulled the original case file on the Marquis heist and began reviewing the materials. She found the interview notes from 1993, including the interview with Terence Bryant. She noted that Bryant had been flagged as a person of interest due to his financial struggles and his access to the building, but that there had never been sufficient evidence to obtain a search warrant or make an arrest. Torres decided to conduct a limited investigation. She requested surveillance on Terence, focusing specifically on his financial activities. What agents observed over the following weeks was revealing. Terence lived modestly, his lifestyle entirely consistent with his documented income from security consulting. His bank accounts showed normal patterns of deposits and withdrawals, but he paid for almost everything in cash. And agents watching him noticed that the bills he used appeared worn and dated. On July 22, 2019, FBI agents obtained a warrant to examine Terrence's financial records more thoroughly. They discovered that while his documented income was legitimate, he had no clear source for the cash he spent regularly. His bank withdrawals didn't account for his cash spending patterns. The discrepancy wasn't enormous, perhaps $15,000 to $20,000 per year, but it was consistent and unexplained. Torres then took a crucial step. She contacted the storage facility in Forest Park and requested records. Of all units rented between 1993 and 1994, she was looking for any rental that had been maintained continuously since that period. The facility provided a list of 12 long-term rentals that fit the criteria. One of them had been rented in January 1993 under the name David Coleman, with cash payments processed every 6 months through a P.O. box. The rental had been maintained without interruption for over 26 years. Torres obtained a warrant to open the storage unit. On August 8, 2019, FBI agents cut the lock and entered Unit 247 at the Forest Park facility. Behind stacks of boxes and moving blankets, they found a large commercial safe. Inside the safe were approximately $4.3 million in cash, all of it currency printed before 1993, bundled and stored with humidity control packets. The bills' serial numbers were checked against records from the original theft. They matched deposits from 3 different nightclubs that had delivered receipts to the marquee on the night of March 27, 1993. Terrence Bryant was arrested at his home in Decatur on the morning of August 9, 2019. He was 58 years old, 26 years removed from the night he had crawled through a hole in a basement wall and changed his life forever. When agents arrived, Terrence was drinking coffee on his back porch reading the newspaper. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't express surprise. He later told investigators that he had been expecting this moment for 26 years, and that in some ways it was a relief. The case generated significant media attention. The story of the patient thief, who had hidden in plain sight for more than a quarter century, fascinated the public. Details emerged during the investigation and subsequent trial. The FBI traced the storage unit's rental payments and confirmed Terrence's identity through old surveillance footage from the facility's parking lot. Simone Whitaker's observations about the currency proved to be the thread that unraveled everything. Prosecutors noted that without her attention to detail and willingness to report her suspicions, the case might never have been solved. Terrence pleaded guilty to theft, money laundering, and several other charges in February 2020. During his sentencing hearing, he spoke briefly, expressing remorse for the crime and acknowledging the harm caused to the victims and the community. He explained that the theft had been motivated by desperation to help his family, but that he understood this didn't justify his actions. The judge sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison, with credit for time served. The remaining $4.3 million was returned to the insurance company that had paid the original claim. Terrence's assets, including his home, were seized to partially satisfy restitution orders. The Markey case became a teaching example for security professionals and law enforcement. The breach exposed vulnerabilities in older security systems and highlighted the importance of comprehensive interior security measures, not just reinforced doors and exterior walls. Financial institutions updated their protocols for handling large cash volumes, implementing more frequent audits and better tracking systems. Simone Whitaker received the $100,000 reward that had remained unclaimed for 26 years. She used part of the money to enroll in criminal justice courses at Georgia State University, inspired by her role in solving the case. The story of Terrence Bryant serves as a reminder that even the most meticulously planned crimes carry the weight of time. His patience and discipline allowed him to evade capture for over 2 decades. But in the end, it was the small, overlooked detail of old currency that connected the dots. Sometimes justice moves slowly, but the truth, like those worn bills, eventually surfaces.